Hey everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me, as always, is my brother Brendan. Together, we make movies with DBS Films. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about what we are expecting for the release of our 11th feature, The Forest of Death. We're going to have a two-part episode. Basically, we're going to describe what we're kind of looking at, how we feel about the project in itself, and what we're expecting for the launch, which is coming very soon. As always, be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online because that's a place to be. We make movies for our fans with our fans. So if you ever want to be part of the action behind the scenes, that is the place to be. So going into part one, I really kind of wanted to talk about, now that we have that finished product, it's always something different where you can really review what worked, what didn't work, kind of get an idea of it. And I think one of the biggest things is we did have the super fans. Our amazing Discord has already seen this movie and they've given us the feedback, which is just a wealth of data. So before we start hopping into that, do you want to kind of talk about how it's a lot different when you finally have that final form of the movie? And I will call you out immediately for this all the time. Every time we're done filming, you're just like, I don't know, this thing might be good, might be bad. I don't quite know what we have here. I'm usually the more optimistic one because I got my way through the rough edit and I see where the pieces are. But having that final cut really does clarify, did this work? Did this not work? What's the feedback? And it allows you to just learn and progress.
Yeah, 100%. And this is one reason why we always tell indie filmmakers to upload something. You need to have an uploaded project because if it's not uploaded somewhere, in my mind, it's not finalized. And if it's not finalized, you can always change things. With a movie, I mean, I think especially this one, we maybe had 30 to 40 hours worth of raw footage and had to cut that down to an hour and 20 minutes. That's so many different directions I could have taken this movie. I could have done a whole bunch of different stuff. And there's a lot of unknowns. So it's very difficult to sit back and, take a top down view of the movie and try and figure out what went well, what we need to work on and, what mistakes and pitfalls we need to avoid in the future. So, now I always say that like uploading it and getting on the platform is like the final step of the process. But there really is one more step, which is just giving yourself feedback. I'm trying to watch this movie as, a regular person and really try and learn, taking a look at what I did with the script and how it turned out and how we can get better, not only, as a director, but as just a production and a studio and how we can make this just a smoother process.
Exactly that. I mean, if you don't have that finished product, so much can still change. You're really kind of spinning your wheels. And like, as any creative knows, perfection can oftentimes just be that just wall preventing you from getting something up and uploaded. So our 11th feature, now termed The Forest of Death. You've probably heard us refer to it as Shapeshifter for the longest time. This was one that, I would say I'm really proud of the ones that we stretch on. Not that Into the Forest 2.0, which in my opinion is already going to be our best movie yet. Looks amazing. We're getting through that process. But what ends up happening to me is, that's an idea. We've done it before. It's found footage. We're kind of feeling a little bit more comfortable. This was a brand new concept. It was a bigger concept. It was a bolder concept. So, this one, I'm really proud seeing it come together just because there's a lot that can go wrong with filmmaking. So, overall, as the one film that we stretched on, how do you feel about, just getting it completed and not having any major issues?
Yeah, this one was an absolute beast, and I think we kinda got a little cocky after Murder House, with how well that shoot went. It was a very isolated movie, and I think I kinda underestimated how easy it was to have just van pickups. So, Shapeshifter really was the first large scale production that we had. This script was extremely ambitious. There was a lot of different scenes in there, a lot of different stuff, a lot of production value in that movie. And, it was just a lot of actors as well. So on all fronts, it was a very ambitious project. It was our most expensive project to date. And, I think the script was very ambitious as well. I really didn't even the editing was really ambitious. I think all the way through this project was just a lot. And, the good news and what I look back on is we'll probably, for the foreseeable future, at least in the next year, not have to deal with something as crazy as this. And, once whatever, doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I always kind of look back at Shapeshifter and be like, all right, like that was crazy. We completed that. We got it done. We're about to get it uploaded. Nothing else could really affect me that much because I'm not going to put myself in the position to have a brand new script that's extremely ambitious and a giant large scale production like that one again, because I know how difficult it was to go through from screenwriting all the way through editing. It was just a lot. That being said, I think we've learned more from this movie than maybe the first 8 that we did combined. We learned a lot. We got really better at pacing. We got really better at cinematography. And I'm really proud of everybody who is a part of this project because I think it was a huge step up in DBS Films history, whether or not that shows on the actual final product. But from what we learned, the jump from Shapeshifter to Into the Forest 2 is by far our biggest jump. And I credit that movie from, just allowing us to learn at a very accelerated pace because it was such a difficult endeavor.
Exactly that. I mean, when you really work hard and you push your limits, that's how you get better. That's how you improve. So it really was the case. We always knew going into this one that it was going to be quite the film shoot. You can listen to our day-by-day breakdown of the actual filming process. Aside from the first day, I feel like we kind of had things really under control. It was another one of those shoots where we're filming until the sun comes up, where you're just running out of, nightlight, in the sense of just rushing before the dawn and then rushing to get out of there, all of those things. So classic DBS. Up until then, Into the Forest, if you've listened to that, one's our first one where we really had some time to basically decompose and everything there. So, I think the big thing I wanted to really talk about in this episode is just what we learned now that we have that final part. And then what we'll basically mention is, what we're expecting in the release coming up, which is going to be out, relatively soon. So we'll talk more about kind of getting out there, what we're expecting. This one, we really just want to talk about what we learned. I think the biggest thing, for me is you always see the pacing improve in movies, especially our movies. And, what's the number one thing? You can have a good movie, you can have a bad movie, don't have a boring movie. You just need it to move. And I think the one thing that stuck out to us, and at least to me, is that this was the first time that we really kind of focused and nailed a lot of the downbeats, but we also did have a lot of upbeats in there. I mean, every time I watch this movie, by the time we get to the Rogers fire pit scene, I'm like, man, this thing's going so fast. It must be 10 minutes in. And you're 30 minutes into that. So I think the pacing, especially in the pacing of the downbeats, was the big improvement to me. I'm curious what your big improvements you saw were.
Yeah, I think this is by far our best paced movie. And I'm really proud of this movie because it is really well paced and it has a lot of lore. And see a lot of indie filmmakers and just filmmakers struggle in general with creating their world and telling the rules of that world and building their lore in a fast paced way. A lot of times, lore dumps will really slow the movie down and it drags the movie and it's very hard to get that pacing. And, you've heard us talk about it before that a lot of our money comes from AVOD, which is advertising video on demand. So you want to have, you want to hook your audience member and make them watch all the way through the movie. Well, if you have all these large lore dumps and you're having these scenes where they have to explain the rules of your world and how, in our case, the creature operates, those could be very boring. And I think we did a really good job of creating clever ways to either show the audience what's going on or clever ways to have characters describe what's going on or just having very engaging dialogue, which is what we did with the Roger and the fire pit scene. That was about a 4 or 5 minute Warner sequence where he explains, exactly what's going on. He tells stories and it's very engaging. It's very cinematic. It's in front of a fire pit, which fire always does really well. But, I think that's kind of a jump up in our screenplay writing. I thought we kind of touched the surface of this in the Murder House, but we really kind of finalized it in the Shapeshifter, and the Shapeshifter has infinitely more lore than the Murder House did. But all the way through, I think that we did a really good job of, pacing this movie out and making sure that it had enough time to breathe, as well as, keep the viewer engaged all the way throughout the movie.
Yeah, I think that's super critical, developing the lore. I think this is why it's one of my favorite. I'm a huge monster lore type horror guy, so I love it when they have a breakdown of this. But I think this is just one tip out there to any indie filmmaker listening to this episode, particularly. We kind of talk about it a lot when it comes to different pacing stuff. We'll probably continue to beat it over your head, but have a scene like that Roger fire pit scene. I mean, take a look at our trailer. In one scene, you should have an actor be able to basically sum up the entire movie in the sense of, hey, this is what's happening here. This is kind of what the monster is. We do it multiple times throughout the movie. We say at least 3 times. But, Ben, again, did an absolutely fantastic job with the role of Roger. And having it so clearly laid out to you is to me, very critical when it comes to, developing a plot or a lore. So I think another thing that stands out to me, and my biggest criticism with the Murder House, I would say, is it just looks like a dark Airbnb. It's one location. There's me in the van. It's kind of going around, but you almost really do get like an eyeball fatigue of it. And I think the cinematography is a big step up with this one. And I think what we learned with the shapeshifter or force of death, now we basically took that to Into the Forest, and I mean Into the Forest 2.0 is by far our best looking movie yet. Now obviously you're a cinematographer, you're learning, you're getting more reps, you get hours and hours and hours of practice. You go through, edit it, you have to go through the pain of the shots you screwed up, so you're going to go ahead and learn a lot from each one of those. But I think that was a big thing cinematography wise.
Yeah, I would agree. And with Murder House, I really wanted to go with like realistic lighting. But the problem is they're in this house and there's no windows. It's at night, and they're moving around. There's no real lighting. And I made the mistake of being like, all right, we'll just use flashlights and we'll use very low light. And you can do that. It's spooky. The issue is, like, if you're doing that for an hour and 20 minutes, it's going to look the same. So the Murder House never really had that cinematic look. And, I really wasn't too happy with how I shot that movie. So I said, well, the shapeshifter, I'm just going to light everything proper and make everything look really cinematic, even if it doesn't make any sense. When the movie releases, you'll see there's a lot of scenes out in the woods, and, that moon is very bright. It's a very bright moon that night. But the movie looks much better, very cinematic. And I testament that to, just learning from my mistakes. And I think that a lot of filmmakers need to do this. This is the reason why we tell you to make as many movies as possible, because the jump from one movie to the next is exponential every single time, especially just looking back at us from Girl in Cabin 13 to, Into the Forest 2, which is, about to be almost completed as far as the rough cut goes. The jump is just exponential. I've seen great gains every single movie, and they're not slowing down. Just doing these things, you get, if you're out there for 12 hours a day for 8 hours, or for 8 days for 12 hours a day, that's almost 100 hours that you're going to get done in a week. And just to learn that quickly, learn on the fly, it's just it's such a great process that when you finally can decompress, you're going to essentially level up. And this is why I'd also recommend, if you can have the ability to shoot features as opposed to shorts, because in order to get that 100 hours, you'd have to shoot a lot of shorts, where I think one big feature, you can really learn very quickly and get very good at this stuff. And I'm really looking forward to, going through this whole year shooting 4 movies and then really seeing how much better we get, moving forward into 2024.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, again, the movies, they're all stepping stones for us to build on. They're all a lot of different, things you learn that you wouldn't even know about. What I will say, though, is I feel like, Girl in Cabin 13, we always mention that is kind of the milestone, breaks away from the Hateful Eight, as we so lovingly term them. And it solidifies to me the DBS model, in the sense of, okay, we're starting to understand what we're doing here. I think the big thing to me with Shapeshifter is it almost kind of proved our model a lot more, just because, again, it was an ambitious movie concept. It was an ambitious idea. Girl in Cabin 13, super tiny in the sense of we kept it the most basic thing ever. I still believe that there's not even a plot to it. And then you have The Haunting of the Murder House, which was a plot that we knew already worked, but it was still one location. And as you mentioned, we had me in a van, so we were able to really kind of cheat a lot of that. Shapeshifter, much bigger task, much bigger set, much bigger everything. But basically, our, streamlined team was able to handle it. Us, me working on the editing side of things, constantly getting it up to go. Dylan being like PA extraordinaire / doing basically everything there. Small crew, you just filming 24/7. It worked for a much bigger concept. So I think one of the other things that I look at for Shapeshifter or the Force of Death is, the confidence level you get after shooting that beast, especially with the DBS model, in the sense of like, hey, it works. And not only does it work, but this was the first one that we had a super fan of ours. Huge shout out to Howard and Aries, as you know him in the Discord. But I think it just really solidified that, hey, our production model is working. We don't necessarily need to work on tweaks as much because, again, if you look at the Hateful Eight, there's a lot of shifting of teams. There's a lot of different things that we were doing, people stepping up into different roles, where I feel like now we're kind of like, all right, this is how it works.
Yeah, it was a huge confidence booster because we're not going to have an idea as bold as Shapeshifter, at least for a while. And I think the confidence that comes from making that kind of movie, to telling a crazy story full of lore, full of special effects and crazy scenes, I could take the Shapeshifter movie and you could easily make it a Bigfoot movie. You could easily make it an alien movie. There's a lot of different villains and creatures that we can kind of slide into that movie. And I think that's really cool because then that starts to allow us to branch out into different directions. Really, with the first Hateful Eight, we were stuck to one location, 2 or 3 actors. Telling lore and building stories was very difficult for us. And, Murder House and Girl in Cabin 13 were both small one location shoots. This one had a lot of stuff to it. And we pulled it off. So moving forward, we could always use Shapeshifter, or at least the foundation of Shapeshifter, to slide in different monsters and use that kind of as a template or an outline to either get scripts started or just understand how to slide in another creature there and make a movie. And then at that point, when you have the outline, when you have the foundation, we have the essential blueprint to how to make a good horror movie, then you can start to focus on the details. You can work with actors more. You could try and give the characters more depth. And I think that's going to be our next big jump in filmmaking, is just, ironing out the small little details. How do you really make engaging dialogue? How do you make unique characters? And I'm excited to really branch into that kind of stuff, because that's how you start to make really good movies.
Yeah, it's a lot comes from conquering such a good production like that, or big production like that. And now that we're breaking back into found footage, talk about the opposite end of the spectrum, in the sense that they're usually a lot easier, a lot less they have to worry about for setting scenes up. Just even in Into the Force 2.0, like, how many scenes do we actually need to use a light for? I feel like it's just one of those things where once you come off of something like that, you're able to really kind of develop it. I think the other thing that, we're starting to be able to work on when it comes to, one, our experience, but then two, having a smoother shoot, is just better performances from our actors. And now, one thing that we always mention here, you can always take a look at it and hear it. Our actors do an absolutely fantastic job. I think most people completely have no clue what acting really entails when it comes to actually being able to perform on set under these conditions, all of these things. We're moving quick. As our production gets squeezed because we're running out of time, we're just like, go ahead, say this, go ahead, do this. Whereas now we kind of have more ability to work with them. And also this was the first time that we really utilized a lot of pre-production, which we basically doubled in Into the Forest. So it allows for much better roles. Again, we also had actors that we've worked with, so we were a lot more comfortable with them on set. But I feel like this was the first movie where it felt like more so than just, hey, let's get through the scene. It's like, hey, how can we almost improve the scene a little bit more for the acting? I think it really shines through.
Yeah, and I think one problem, actors get a lot of flack, but you just don't know the situation on set. And especially with the first Hateful Eight movies, we were moving so fast that, the performance, or not the performance, the production was lagging behind the performance, where my only concern was to get a movie done and uploaded. Would I work with the actors? Yes, but it was mainly like, just make sure you don't mess up your lines and you're hitting the beats that we're trying to hit. There was no real deep pre-production stuff. There really wasn't a lot of variation or changing on set, just because we didn't have time to do that. With Shapeshifter, we worked very hard in pre-production with a lot of the actors, and I think that shows in their performances. I think Ben did an absolute phenomenal job just giving his character life, so that when we went on set and we had these long fire pit scenes, he had 7 or 8 takes that were, maybe 8 to 10 minutes each, and he didn't have to cut or have to stop them at all because he knew his character so well. He knew which beats to hit and where to go. But I mean, it's the same thing with Chloe and Stephanie and Tyler, and even Dylan put in a lot of good effort in this movie. And I think it shows. And I think that, number one, it's just the production side of having more time because we're not rushing as much, which gives the actors time to, sit in their rooms and really, memorize their lines and kind of figure out how they want to deliver it. But it's also on the actors. They did a really good job. The pre-production that they did and the ability to take these characters and give them the life of their own, which is what you want from an actor. I'm kind of giving you the blueprint, the template of what's in my mind, but I'm hiring you for a reason. And the reason is to, breathe life into this character and give them a little bit more depth. Because, when you write, direct, and edit a movie, I have to view the whole production from a top-down level where the actors are very granular. They're very focused on themselves, which is what you want, because they can really be like, how would I say this line, or how would we do this, or my character wouldn't say this. Can I do this instead? And if they're hyper focused on just themselves, it's easier on me because I don't have to, essentially give them their whole character backstory, their whole character life, to get a good performance out of it, because we just don't have time to do that. So I was very happy, all being said, with, I think the production helped the actors out, but I think the actors also helped out the production. So I think we had some really cool synergy going on with this project.
Yeah, I think, again, like, you look back to the Hateful Eight, you can almost point out scenes where it is the 5 a.m. We just got to get this scene done. The person's basically running on vapors, and we're just getting the performance that we're getting, and we're moving on. Whereas now it's allowing us to do that. We're understanding it. So really, as you mentioned, the actors do take a lot of flack because they're the ones that you see, but it's a lot of times it's the production, it's behind the scenes that is causing these performances. So I think that was another huge step up that we're seeing. It's just the dynamics of it. I think the last thing I really kind of want to, mention when it comes to the overall one is, as we make movies, I feel like you have your own different tastes. People have different tastes of which ones they like. I even love it with the Discord. Well, actually, here's a better one to start with. So let's go with the Discord reviews. How awesome, again, it is to have that data, because really we have our opinions that we're mentioning here, but almost, seeing exactly what our fans and our target audience is. We have, I think it was like maybe 25 question Google form or something like that we created. We ranked the scares. We saw which ones hit. And I love that. I mean, I love seeing that data so much. Again, huge shout out to our Discord. It really does empower us to not only, because we have our opinions, but we might be biased on the shoot, because again, like, I feel like the better the shoot goes, I feel like the more happy you are with the results. I think it was something that, a lot of the Discord was kind of confirming the things that we wanted them to see. And it was just great getting that data back.
Yeah, it's extremely valuable because I think most filmmakers are going to ask their friends and family, what they think of the movie. And for the most part, they're going to give them, good feedback because um, they like the filmmaker. With the Discord, we really broke it down into about 20 questions that either I didn't know the answer to, and it was mainly like, is this too fast? Is it too slow? Um, those kind of questions, because I'm trying to figure out like what I need to fix when I edit the movie. So that stuff's always super important, but it's also important to see, which characters they like better, because we can take some of these characters, the traits of the characters, and put them in other movies. The best pop scares is extremely important as well because we can reuse pop scares. Um, and just the overall feedback, where does this rank on the 12 movies or the 11 movies that we've made before? Because here's the big thing. You can ask a lot of people, what they like, and it's very opinionated. Some people have different tastes. So you can ask a couple of people and they all say one thing when really the large amount of data say a completely different thing. I was very surprised to see that the Roger gun scare was the highest rated pop scare because in my mind, it was maybe mid. It was all right. It wasn't the best. So that was interesting to see that kind of feedback. And then obviously like the rankings of where this movie lands, are the ones that we've made before. So I think it's kind of dangerous a little bit if you're asking people for feedback and you don't have a very large demographic of people that can give you feedback. And I think this is one of the competitive advantages is that, if we have 100 people giving you responses, that's a pretty good slice of what your overall market's going to be. And that information is extremely powerful and it's very difficult to obtain. So, I'm super thankful for the Discord for giving me that stuff. And we're going to use the top 3-4 pop scares again. We're going to try and use character traits and we're going to try and remove some of the stuff that, people just didn't like.
I mean, that's the process for it. It's eliminate what doesn't work and just amplify what does. So the last thing I want to talk about is our personal opinion. I would say by far Force of Death is my favorite one. It moves the fastest, but I love a good monster lore. I love the shapeshifter. I love a villain. So to me, it's up there, Devil in the Room. I like my guy Frank the Demon. What an amazing lore character there. I would say it's up there. When I have to rank them, it's, I always rank our newest ones in my opinion, just because they are so much better. But if I have to go overall plot and style, I'm saying Force of Death, Devil in the Room, then I'll probably do Invited, and then Whitlow is almost kind of my one. But it looks like a 70s movie. It feels cool. I think there's so much cool stuff. And again, this is always the case, guys, these are low indie budgets. We revisit this idea with an actual budget. You have some sort of shape shifting. You don't really need too much CGI, but there's a lot you could do with it. And we're already kind of talking this idea, but I absolutely love the concept. So I'm curious, as it ranks in the other movies that you have, where would you say you put the overall concept, not so much the movie?
Well, I really hope that this movie does well. I really do, because there's a lot of really cool stuff that we can do with this movie. I already know how to fix it. And it was pretty much like once we finished the shoot, I was like, oh man, like I could have done this in a completely different way. And that's just filmmaking. There's just a million different options to do a different concept. You can give, 10 directors the same shapeshifter log line and you have 10 completely different movies. And sometimes it takes you a few times to kind of figure out which way you want to go with it. And I think that, I love 70s and 80s horror movies. I grew up on those. I think they're really cool. I love the style of them. And that's what we made with this movie. That being said, I do not like directing this kind of style. I really like the dark and gritty. I think it's just a little bit easier to get performances out of actors. I think it's easier to keep that elevated horror, which is like one of my favorite. I think it's probably my favorite type of horror now, just the more realistic and gritty stuff. But that being said, the movie that we made was the movie that was in my head. And I think a lot of people will like it. And I think it'll resonate with a lot of people. That being said, if I do the shapeshifter concept again, we're going to make it very dark and gritty and more psychological, because I do think that this is a way to blend a thriller movie with a horror movie. And I think that, psychological horror thriller is a really cool genre that kind of gets a little bit more people. I think the people who like the thrillers, the court of the who done it, who is the shapeshifter right now, would really like the 2.0 version of this movie. That being said, we have to see if people like the shapeshifter. There's not a lot of shapeshifter stuff out there, which is kind of a red flag if nobody else is doing it. That being said, the cover and the title, whatever you think of them, is by far our highest converting, is going to send the most traffic to this movie. The amount of people who are going to view this movie is probably going to be the most. It's just going to come down to, do they watch it all the way through, and do they actually like the movie?
Watch out, guys. Brendan's going to get super edgy in our next one. It's just a warning of this. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm excited for it. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to wrap up this episode. In our next episode, we're going to talk about what we're expecting for the actual launch itself. So as always, be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online. That is the place to be, because we make movies for our fans, with our fans, and we want to make movies with you. So be sure to go ahead and join us on that Discord channel. And until then, have a good one.